Alright, this is lesson 6.2 and it's going to be split into a couple videos. The first one should be quite short. It's just reminding you the definition of what primary and reciprocal trig ratios are. And the easiest way to do it is to graph an angle from standard position on the Cartesian plane. Our principal angle here is our theta, and if we draw a right angle triangle ranging from the initial arm to the terminal arm, we could label our sides with x and y, and as our point P with coordinates x, y rotates around the Cartesian plane, we create a circle with a radius that is the diagonal or your terminal arm from the origin to point P. And we can use this labeling x, y, and r to define our primary trig ratios and our reciprocal trig ratios. Our primary trig ratios are sine, cos, and tan. And sine, cos, and tan are always of an angle, our principal angle. And if you remember your SOHCAHTOA, you can read off, using x, y, and r, what sine, cos, and tan are. So from our angle, our principal angle, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, opposite's y, hypotenuse is r, so sine is y over r. Cos is adjacent over hypotenuse, or CAH. Adjacent is x, hypotenuse is r, so cos is x over r. And tan is opposite over adjacent, which is y, opposite over x adjacent. Our reciprocal trig ratios are cosecant, secant, and cotan. And to match up the primary with its reciprocal can sometimes be challenging. The easiest way to remember it is that tan's reciprocal is cotan, and they sound familiar, or they sound similar. So cotan theta is just the reciprocal of tan theta. And reciprocal means flip, so we flip our fraction y over x, and we get x over y for cotan. For sine and cosine, their reciprocals are cosecant and secant. And the way I remember it is I always match up if sine starts with an S, its reciprocal starts with a C. That's cosecant. And if cos starts with a C, its reciprocal starts with an S, which is secant. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So that means we're going to flip our ratio y over r, and we get r over y. And for secant, we're going to flip cos, and we get r over x. And those are the primary and reciprocal trig ratios using x, y, and r. And of course, we can consider the cast rule as well, so just want to add on really quickly. The cast rule tells you which trig ratios are going to be positive in which quadrants. So cast is labeled from quadrant 4 and counterclockwise, so C-A-S-T. And these refer to your primary trig ratios only. However, if a primary trig ratio is positive, the reciprocal of a positive is always going to be positive. So in quadrant 2, sine is positive, so cosecant is also positive because they're reciprocals. Reciprocal, you're just flipping the fraction. Nothing changes with the sign. So in quadrant 2, cosine is negative. If you flip a negative number, you still get a negative. So cosine and secant would be negative in quadrant 2. And that's how the cast rule applies to both primary and reciprocal. A stands for all, so sine, cos, tan, cosecant, secant, and cotan will all be positive in quadrant 1. Okay, that's our video on primary and reciprocal trig ratios. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in part 2 where we talk about special triangles in radians.